African unity has been a dream for generations, from visionary leaders like Kwame Nkrumah to passionate Pan-African thinkers. The idea was always simple and powerful. A united Africa is a stronger Africa. It's a vision of a continent speaking with one voice, trading with itself, and charting its own destiny. Yet, decades after independence, Africa remains a continent of 54 individual states, often politically fragmented and economically divided. So, the big question is, why has this dream of African unity always been so difficult to achieve? What are the real barriers that have stood in the way for so long? The answer isn't simple, and it requires looking honestly at history, politics, and economics. Let's break it down. First, we need to understand that the concept of a single, unified Africa as a political entity is relatively new. Unity had to be imagined because it wasn't inherited. Before European colonialism carved up the continent, Africa wasn't a single political unit. It was a vibrant and diverse tapestry of powerful kingdoms, sprawling empires, and independent societies. Think of the Mali Empire, the Kingdom of Congo, or the Zulu Kingdom. These were distinct political entities with their own interests, their own cultures, and their own identities. They traded, they fought, and they coexisted, but they weren't part of one overarching African state. Then came colonialism. European powers drew lines on a map with little to no regard for the existing social, cultural, or historical realities. These new borders lumped together rival groups and split others apart. After independence, these newly formed states were suddenly expected to unite, despite having no shared history of political unity. They were being asked to build a continental house on a foundation that was designed to keep them apart. This leads us to the second major hurdle: the colonial borders and the rise of national interests. The borders of modern African nations were not drawn by Africans. They were imposed from the outside. When these countries gained independence, their new leaders faced an enormous challenge: building a nation out of these artificial constructs. Their primary focus, understandably, was on securing their own sovereignty and ensuring the survival of their new state. They had to create a national identity, build institutions, and manage diverse populations, all within these inherited, often illogical, borders. In this context, the idea of continental unity often felt like a threat. Many leaders feared that giving up some of their hard-won sovereignty to a larger continental body would weaken their authority, threaten their political control, and possibly create instability within their own borders. So, protecting the nation-state became the priority. Unity was a beautiful ideal, but national survival was a pressing reality. Cooperation was often seen as a risk rather than a guarantee of strength. The third challenge was the sheer diversity of political systems and ideologies that emerged after independence. The Cold War played a huge role here. Newly independent African nations became a chessboard for global superpowers. Some countries adopted socialist models, aligning with the Soviet Union. Others embraced capitalism. Looking to the West, we saw military dictatorships, one-party states, and eventually, fledgling democracies. These deep ideological differences created a climate of mistrust among African neighbors. Instead of seeing each other as natural partners, countries often aligned more closely with their foreign patrons, be it France, the UK, the US, or the USSR than with the country right next door. There were endless conferences and speeches about African brotherhood and unity. But in practice, political and ideological divisions often ran deeper. Unity was frequently discussed in grand halls, but rarely practiced on the ground where it mattered. On top of all this, there's the problem of weak institutions and a lack of implementation. Unity isn't just about inspiring speeches or shared ideals. It requires concrete action and strong, effective institutions to make it happen. It needs a shared commitment to common rules and a willingness from every country to sometimes sacrifice short-term national gains for long-term continental benefits. Organizations were created to do just this, like the Organization of African Unity, or OAU, which later became the African Union, or O. Their goal was to promote unity and cooperation. However, these bodies have often been criticized for lacking real enforcement power. They can pass resolutions and make declarations, but they often can't force member states to comply. The principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of member states, while designed to protect sovereignty, also made it difficult to hold leaders accountable or enforce collective decisions. So, you end up with a lot of great plans on paper, but weak implementation in reality. Finally, we have to talk about the economy. Economic competition, rather than cooperation, has been a major barrier to unity. The colonial economic model left many African countries dependent on exporting raw materials like cocoa, oil, copper, or coffee to Europe and other parts of the world. As a result, many African economies look very similar. They produce the same things and end up competing against each other for the same foreign markets. Instead of building robust trade networks with each other, African countries often trade far more with Europe, China, or America than they do with their immediate neighbors. Just think about it. It can be easier and cheaper to ship goods from a port in West Africa to a port in Asia than to transport them overland to a neighboring country. This economic fragmentation makes political unity much harder to achieve. When your economies aren't integrated, it's difficult to build the deep, practical connections that political unity requires. So, where does that leave us? Has the dream of African unity failed? Not at all. It's important to see unity not as a single event or a symbol, but as a complex, long-term process. Realizing this dream has always been difficult, not because it's impossible, but because the obstacles are real and deeply rooted in history. Overcoming them requires immense trust between nations, the development of strong and empowered institutions, a fundamental restructuring of economic relationships, and a new generation of leadership willing to think beyond national borders for the collective good of the continent. The journey toward unity is a marathon, not a sprint. It's a project that is still unfolding, with new initiatives like the African Continental Free Trade Area showing that the dream is very much alive. If you believe that Africa's future depends on having these honest conversations about the challenges and opportunities of unity and cooperation, make sure you subscribe to the Great Africa Reality, because the continent's true strength lies not in isolation, but in finding its collective purpose. Thanks for watching.